Hi, I'm Em, and this is Fanfaria. Today, I'm going to be talking about a concept that I like to think of as the big disconnect. The big disconnect. So this was a concept that kind of came to me, I say over the course of or after a conference I've just been to. And to me, it's the idea that we are starting to see changes in dentistry and the way we're looking at the profession and practicing dentistry as a whole in terms of incorporating wellness of clinicians, looking at resilience, looking at burnout and how to prevent it, looking at mental health issues, and just all those things, conversations that weren't being had even a couple of years ago. And it's great to see they're being had and that there are things trying to be implemented. And the reason I kind of call this the great disconnect is I think that at the top levels of both our dental associations, our kind of dental councils, if you're working for corporates or bodies that have kind of like a managing or directing kind of part to them, they are talking in these terms and they are looking at these things and they are seeing the importance of them. But the disconnect, and this isn't exclusive to dentistry. I see this in terms of corporate and a disconnect with how to enact some of the things that almost having a wellness program or some kind of nod to that is a tick in the box, even if it isn't effective or doesn't go anywhere. But what I see happening in dentistry is that all these good intentions and these great starts and things do get thrown out and dished out to a practice level, but the barrier quite often is the acceptance and the mindset of the middle tier there. So the people that aren't seeing it are your DAs, your associate dentists, contract dentists, your therapists and hygienists, your reception staff, because there's a reluctance to change what's already going on. There's a kind of not believing in what doesn't quite feel like science or feels separate to the profession. I think we have been trained for so long to be a quite independent entity in the way that we do our work and the way that we run our surgeries and practices and how we lead and how we have our practice managers manage a practice. And I think the turning points have been many and numerous, probably over the last kind of decade or two. But things like COVID have brought a lot more stress outside of the surgery into our world and managing to deal with it. It's as we kind of have younger or next generations kind of coming through into the workforce in those younger, lower income brackets, that they're expecting, if not demanding, more from their workplace, from a care of duty from their employers. They're expecting to be managed and to be led, and for that to include wellness and fostering resilience and looking after them. As I say, a duty of care. And it's, as I say, dentistry doesn't stand alone in this, but it's quite different to how we've been managing ourselves and leading ourselves for a long time. So we don't, and it's again not a fault of dental schools, there's so much to do in 5 years that how on earth can you possibly do it all? But we're not given any leadership training, we're not given any management training. I've been lucky enough to have that through armed forces, through things that I've sought out to do. And there's many that you could argue that maybe some of how they're recruiting to dental school and all that stuff you have to kind of bump out your CVs and your applications with is recognising leadership potential in people, with a view to hoping that they will be natural leaders and go on and lead a great team and practice and take the profession forwards. But I think we've gone past the point of assuming that we can just do what we can do with the tools that we were born with and the experiences we had along the way. Is that we do need to be looking at how we are teaching our leaders to lead. And you might think, well, I'm not in a leader position in a practice. But as I've spoken about in podcasts before, if you're working with a DA or assistant nurse, however you wish to term it, that's your team of two, and you're leading that room in terms of how you're managing things. You're leading your receptionist in terms of managing your book. Some of that might be being done for you, but there should be some degree of autonomy in there. And so there are leadership roles even within those that aren't necessarily thought of as your traditional leadership roles. Our practice managers, generally speaking, and this is a broad brush and sweeping kind of statement, and it may be different in different countries, and there'll be some practices that are doing this amazingly and some that it's just not happening at all, is that quite often our practice managers are being brought up from being DAs or hygienists or therapists or receptionists and brought up, but they're being in-house trained by the lead dentists, so being trained in the fashion that they want the practice to run. And again, not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but moving forwards, we need to be kind of making sure that it's not just kind of cloning how someone without leadership training is suddenly thinking that something should be led. Is that we need to be more uniform as a profession so that we can, over the bigger picture, keep people within the profession, and not just your associate dentists and your other clinicians, but in terms of dental assistants and receptionists and all sorts of support staff. Is that really you have to expect that people are going to move, people are going to have children, people are going to leave jobs, join jobs, and it might not be back at your practice again. But what a bonus it is to the whole profession if that person then seeks out another dental job in a different practice where the expectations aren't vastly dissimilar to the one that they left. So as I say, the disconnect, I think, is that these things happen at a higher level in terms of talking about policies to implement, ideas, tools coming down, but they come down in the form of an email or a poster or a kit that arrives at the practice, and then nothing much is done with it because it's not being taught or it's not being put into some kind of training where you can see the purpose of it, how it fits in around the values, how it's going to augment your practice, not just be something in the way or something to be dismissed as a bit woo-woo. That's what happened. And then you end up with the cynicism on the other end of it, that when that stuff arrives in the practice but it's not actually actioned or discussed, it's just on a notice board or in an email inbox, that those that don't feel that that's what's going on become quite cynical and disheartened. So an example of that I can give was I work for a corporate which has been very good at looking at various stress management, even kind of counselling. We have access to something called occupational counselling program where you can have kind of an anonymous help and things like that, and that's been quite well communicated. But they did a campaign a while ago that was along the lines of We Care, and they sent out to practices. They sent mugs and toothbrushes, and there was probably chocolate in there as well. But also there was like a word game or like a card game thing was basically designed as a team exercise to improve communication and getting you to know the people within your practice. But I worked across a couple of practices at this time, and it was just kind of put in the corner, and the mugs are still around in the tea rooms today, but there's no implementation of all of those sentiments and ideas. It feels at the practice level like a tick in the box for those that are wanting to fulfill that and feel that they've done it, but it's not actually having any effect because it's not then being talked through by the middle people, which is your lead dentists and your practice managers, and putting that into some kind of implementation or even just a discussion about why it's arrived and what the basis of that could be. So it's great that we're moving forward. I think that I'm slowly starting to see a filtering out of the most resistant elements to this kind of change, and to steal somebody else's words, and apologies to, this isn't against everyone that would fit this description, but your male, pale and stale element that's maybe the most reluctant to change, and to the point that it starts to question, I don't know about in other countries, but certainly in New Zealand, is like what would be an acceptable retirement age for a dentist, because we do here have dentists working in their 70s. And yeah, that's a whole other can of worms to kind of go into. But I think that the best source of information on these is your dental nurses and your DAs who have worked with a range of dentists, including those that are most reluctant to change, and will tell you appalling stories about ignoring cross-infection protocols and gloves and drawers and all those kind of things, and finding it very difficult to challenge the power dynamic within that situation. So these it's not that these people are going unchallenged, but they're not accepting being challenged by a DA or a practice manager, and quite often it's the dentist that stays and the questioning staff that get moved on. As bullying's a separate thing, but similar things tend to happen with bullies. The bully stays, and the people raising the problems or highlighting the problems get moved on to make life easier. But a lot of those kind of resistant elements are going. It's difficult though, because we work in this unique kind of set of circumstances within a healthcare business model, which you could argue is a bit of an oxymoron in itself. And that, how does that work? And the answer, I guess, is sometimes quite uneasily, because it's not a charity and it does have to function as a business. But that doesn't always kind of fit in with how practitioners want to deliver healthcare, or how patients want to receive healthcare, which makes it quite difficult. And bringing in new leadership styles and new management styles that incorporate all of the things we're starting to talk about, like your wellness programs, your nurturing a practice culture that will foster resilience building, and more that kind of duty of care to your people, which only benefits the industry long term, because it's going to play into increased retention. It's going to have people loving their job more, wanting to come to work. But it's a mindset shift, and sometimes can feel in direct opposition to what we've done or are doing at the moment, which is why it can feel quite threatening to those leads, principal dentists, practice managers who have always done it the way that they've done it and don't see any need for kind of change on that. So yeah, yet again, I'm bringing you kind of ideas that I haven't really kind of solved. Sorry, it's more about getting those conversations started, because we need to start thinking differently, and it's not going to be one person that comes up with the answer for this. It's going to be a collective look at how we do things. It's going to need to be implemented at every practice level, and that's going to look differently where you are in your local kind of circumstances than it is at a top level of dental association or dental council. It needs to be individualized and kind of tapered. We're seeing more and more people just fading away from the profession, and that's not just dentists and clinicians, that's your support staff, that as things like COVID make life more difficult, as patient stressors, bringing them into the surgery, making them more difficult to manage, makes a job stacking supermarket shelves seem a lot more appealing for very similar money than the stress of what they go through with us. So we need to change. We need to get on board with this. We need to keep up with what's going on in other industries and other workplaces, because whilst our clinicians are probably stuck with us as a profession, our support staff very much are not. And if they're seeing the kind of support and encouragement and being looked after by employers elsewhere, then they will jump ship to those places, and we will continue to struggle to staff our practices. So things that have kind of drawn me to this, as I say, apart from just various things to kicking in recently, is that I would recommend listening to a Brené Brown Dare to Lead podcast, where she chats with Simon Sinek and Adam Grant about things similar to what I've been discussing, and that's it's maybe she didn't do episode numbers, but it was in October 2022. And also a local podcast, Bringing Wellbeing to Life, with Dr. Denise Quinlan, who I did my positive psychology diploma with, and is a very interesting lady looking at positive psychology and well-being, and bringing it a lot more into the teaching and education space, as well as corporate. But this episode, I think it's the first one of the latest series, where she's talking to Dr. Lucy Hone as well. And again, just this, how a workplace is changing, how are our people coming into the workplace having different expectations than they may have had even 2 or 3 years ago from what they expect from their employer or employment. So what's happening in your neck of the woods? How's your practice looking? Are there things that are being kind of said, and nice slogans going up on walls that are being looked at but not actioned on? Are there conversations happening? Because being aware is probably the first stage of most of these things, is what's going on with the people in your team. Are they happy in their work? Are they struggling outside of work? And there are ways that we can kind of help them in the workplace as well. It just takes maybe a different approach. And if you're hearing all of this and you're still with me and you're going, that's not my practice, then good on you if you're already out there and doing it, because there are practices that have got this right, and people whose natural instincts have led them down this almost kind of model of leadership and managing anyway. But unfortunately, it's not across the board when I think that it could be. So catch me on Twitter and Facebook as always. Otherwise, I'll catch you next time. Cheers.